Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Other Israel Film Festival. My name is Isaac Zablocki. I'm the director of the festival. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and braving the marathon. Any runners there? No? No? Good. Let's talk about them. This panel right now, I have to say, is one of the most important panels at this festival and goes to the core of what this festival is all about in relation to the nation-state law that was passed this summer in Israel. Our festival is specifically about Arabs and other minorities in Israel who we're trying to bring more into the center and into recognition. That law probably does the opposite. So we found it crucial to have a great panel to discuss this and to give some insights, not only about what's going on the ground in Israel and hear from some voices there, but also about how this relates to the American Jewish community, and I think that is another big part of all of this. I want to thank our partners at the festival, and in general, you're going to be inspired, hopefully, by this conversation and our films, and should be checking out all the amazing work that our partners are doing. I'll say for this event specifically, I want to highlight the Abraham Fund and the New Israel Fund, and you're going to hear more about their work throughout the panel. Also, right after this event, you will be rewarded by the New Israel Fund for all of those who follow their cause and can help support the New Israel Fund. There will be a reception upstairs in the gallery, so please join us right after that. I'd like to also just mention there's one more screening here today. We are a film festival after all, not just conversations, and we have a screening of Megiddo coming up at 5:30 p.m. You'll be able to do all these things. Don't miss this amazing look inside Israel's prison system like no one has ever captured before. It's absolutely fantastic. Then also, of course, we're here till Thursday night, so help spread the word about these films. Many of these films will relate directly back to the things you're going to hear on this panel. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. We'll start with the moderator of the panel, our good friend and the head of the Office of NIF here in New York, Rabbi Ayelet Cohen. Ayelet, thank you so much for being here and doing this and your partnership. I'd like to welcome Shlomi Eldar, who is a filmmaker and has a film coming up here at the festival. We screened Precious Life a few years ago, and that was on the shortlist for the Oscars, and a fabulous film. And his new film, Foreign Land, will be screening here this week, so please join us, I think, Monday night. Don't miss that. Thabet Abu Rass from the Abraham Fund is here with us as well, and can lend to a lot of of the work in Israel relating to this law or the protests to this law. And also Rana Abu Fraiha, who is another filmmaker and activist who has a film here in her footsteps, which is screening Wednesday night. Is my brain still actually working? Thank you. And finally, to give also more of the American perspective and to connect, it's both, I think, can say a lot about the American politics, the American Jewish community, but also his own personal experiences. We're glad to have back Peter Beinart, journalist and correspondent on CNN. Please, folks, take the stage. I hand it over.
I guess I'll be comfortable here.
Please sit according to your political affiliation from right to left, and perfect.
Hi, everybody. We're so pleased to be here. Thank you so much, Yetzi, for that warm welcome. And we're so thrilled, of course, to have Carol Zabar, a member of New Israel Fund's International Board, the founder of the festival. That's what it is. It is not lost on me that we're gathered today on the 23rd anniversary of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. And In thinking about this day, and what we might have thought a few days after the assassination, when the initial shock had subsided a little bit, even then, I don't think we would have imagined that we would be sitting here today, 23 years later, talking about this nation-state law, which so reduces the vision of the founders of the State of Israel, the promises enshrined in Israel's Declaration of Independence, saying that there would be equality for all Israelis, regardless of race, national origin, religion, or sex, that we would be in a time so focused on the shrinking democratic space in Israel. And really today, just a week and a day after the horrendous events last Shabbat in Pittsburgh, and on this anniversary of the assassination of Rabin, of the murder of Rabin, we see all too clearly what can happen when incitement runs unchecked, when radical right-wing forces, when ultranationalism, anti-Semitism, racism are allowed to develop into their ugliest aspects. And I just wanted to name that as we're here. We saw, even in the last few weeks in Israel leading up to the municipal elections, which happened this past week, advertisements, political advertisements for the municipal elections, which looked eerily similar to some of the incitement against Yitzhak Rabin in the days before his assassination. Blatantly racist campaigns, us or them, is this going to be a place for Jews or a place for Arabs? I want to say a few words, just a little bit more in background on the nation-state law. One of the reasons why this law got so much attention is because with the lack of a constitution in Israel, basic laws have the force of constitution. And so to write as a basic law, a law that enhances the rights of Jewish citizens of Israel to the exclusion of other citizens of Israel, a law that strips Arabic status as a national language to a lesser status, gives those tendencies a lot of power. And it is still to be untested, the impact of this law. There's a little bit more information upstairs in the gallery. Actually, there's a photo exhibit of a lot of the protests this summer leading up to the passage of the law and in the days following, focused on the work of a number of our grantees, including Abraham Fund initiatives, and also some information going into greater detail about the law. But what I'd like to do now is hear from our panelists and ask you, by way of introduction, to say a little bit about who you are and the space you inhabit, and how this law and the tumult around its passage affected you personally and affected your community personally. Thabet, let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Thabet Abu Rass, the co-executive director of the Abraha Initiatives right now, not the Abraha Fund Initiatives. And we are a policy change Arab Jewish NGO promoting equality and integration between Arab and Jewish citizens of the State of Israel. We're looking to shared society. We are active. We have a lot of programs. I'm not going to talk about all of programs, but we are emphasizing education in all levels, in the elementary, high school, and we are very active in colleges and universities. Other project that we really proud of, Safe Community. We talk Safe Community in the Arab community. We believe there is a big challenge of the Arab community facing a lot of internal killings, and we believe that the government is investing a lot of money to develop the Arab towns. However, economic development cannot take place with so much violence within the Arab community. And it was shared learning. We believe that we are progressing. From now, I can say, despite national state law, there's a lot of good things happening on the ground. Well, the law is make me very frustrated, but not hopeless. No doubt. Actually, it's giving me a lot to think about. More creative way. What happened after the enactment of this law make me with a lot of hope that Jews and Arabs willing to fight for more democratic Israel and more tolerant and more equal Israel. Actually, it's open everything. Since the inception of the State of Israel, we know there were discrimination against the Arab community, and we lived with this community. Whenever the Arab political leaderships talked about discrimination, we heard from the government, yes, we acknowledge there is discrimination, and it's a process. We have to work to fix it. Well, now there is an attempt to institutionalize discrimination and Jewish supremacy, and we cannot really build a shared society and share the future without equal foot between Jews and Arabs. So, Declaration of Independence of 1948, at least we have argument about that, but at least show us, talk to us, mention democracy, mention equality, and ask the Arabs to join in building the State of Israel. All these things are missing from the nation-state law that we have it now. One more point. I am an Arab. I don't have any problem with seeing Israel. Israel is an expression of self-determination of Jewish people. It's a Jewish state, but it's a Jewish state, and it's state of all of its citizens, including me. Okay, for me, the Jewishness of the state should be a thin layer. It's a symbolic rather than a content. This law is doing the opposite. For me, this government is trying actually to make kind of the second republic of Israel, rebirth of Israel. Okay, Israel that taking the whole Israeli society to different direction, that against building a shared society and share the future. This is why we are really against this law.
Thank you. Rana?
Hi, everyone. Hello, good evening. I'm Rana. I'm a director. I have a movie here. Hope to see you all also on Wednesday night. I can only talk about it, I guess, from a very personal point of view. As a Palestinian lives inside Israel. What happened to me in this time when the law passes, we had this kind of parade of demonstrations, and it went from the most privileged group to the last. And I felt really bad in this, it was a week, I guess, or 2 weeks. And I remembered I felt like all my work also what I'm trying to do with my film and my art is to get people to know who's standing behind these headlines and who are the real people and what are their dreams and fears and emotions, but who are the people, not just the social label. And I really believe that if you see the person, the real people, that you can connect in a different way, and you can care more about the other person. And in this week of all these protests, all my very, very good friends, nobody noticed. Nobody called or just asked if I'm okay or how am I feeling through this whole mess that we're into inside of Israel. And it was pretty devastating for me. Then I talked with them and everything is fine, but I feel like a lot of things, great things happen when people just notice each other. And this is what I miss a lot in Israel. We talk about stuff in a very high level and we complain a lot about the government, but I feel like when people really notice each other and now, as he said really beautifully, that now it's kind of a declaration and everything is out. Like, yeah, we're not one unit. We're two groups and one group is on top of the other. And now it can open up in an absurd way, but it can open up many new things and organizations and cooperations to just grow from the bottom. And I feel like people just need to really notice who's standing, next to them. Yeah.
So we're here 2 days before the American midterm elections, and a lot of similar things have been said about our situation here, kind of the heightened rhetoric of this moment, how much is actually new, and how much is just naming what has been true for a really long time. And I know the conversation around the nation-state law has been very much about this. How much is new in this law, and how much is it naming a reality which has unfortunately unfolded over the last decades. Shlomi, as our Israeli Jew on the panel, can you talk a little bit about your experience around the lead up to the passage of the law and the weeks and months after?
Yes. I'm Shlomi Eldar. I am a journalist and a filmmaker. I covered the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the Israeli TV's Channel 1 and Channel 10 for over 20 years. I did my first steps to go to Gaza Strip before the Oslo Accord and find myself in 2012 exhausted because I realized that the Israeli audience, most of them, influenced by the right-wing government, and they don't want to hear any more about peace. I was the first journalist before Oslo Accord who brought to the Israeli TVs, to the screen, the Palestinian from Gaza Strip as human being. And I think it was the first time that the Israelis saw the Palestinian directly, uncovered. And during my job as a journalist, I signed many points in my point of view toward this national law. The Palestinians, how the government, the right-wing government, watch them, treat them, the Palestinian and the Arab Israelis. And I told my friend yesterday about one point that I remember, that it's a process from the first cadency of Benjamin Netanyahu in 1997. He was elected in 1996 after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. And by the way, I would like to say 2 sentences about that. 23 years, and I think the first time this week, we saw the attempt of the right wing try to erase his memory, try to erase his heritage, and especially try to erase and rewrite the history about the incitement before the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. In 1997, I was a political correspondent, and I found myself 1 feet near Rabbi Kaduri. He was the spiritual rabbi of the Shas movement. And Netanyahu, maybe you are aware of it, whispered to his ear, "The leftist forgot what is to be Jew." The leftist. So this is the beginning to convince the Israeli audience that who will not accept my point, my direction, is my enemy. And the enemy is the Israeli Arabs, the Palestinian, Iran, and also the leftists in Israel. And nothing happened before the law and after the law. Before the national law, all the Israeli Arab citizens knew that they are discriminated comparing to the Jewish people, discriminating in job, in funding, the budget of the municipality and everything in the daily life in Israel. But after the law, it's a statement. Now, the first time Israel, the Knesset, admit that we are a Jewish state without any space to the minority, not only for the Arabs, and everyone will not accept our direction like the others. And the leftists for the liberal in Israel that painted as traitors. So this is the dangers of Israel direction today, my point of view.
So, Peter, this summer was a painful one also from this side of the ocean for American Jews who are deeply connected to Israel. A little bit later, I hope we can talk about some of the other anti-democratic legislation, but for now, maybe just talk a little bit about that and your own experience in terms of how does it feel as a deeply connected American Jew, and what do you see happening writ large in terms of the relationship between American Jews and Israel, and specifically this Israeli government?
I think that one of the things that's changed so much is that during the Obama administration, I think many American Jews and Americans had an ability perhaps to kind of condescend to Israelis in a certain way. There was a sense that Obama was a very kind of classic progressive in the sense that he always described history as moving in this kind of upward arc towards greater equality and greater freedom, and he was always and he himself, for Americans, kind of embodied that, right? The first African-American president, and he would always say to kind of the Israelis, you're going against the current of history. Well, it's much less clear today in 2018 in the United States or around the world that in fact the current of history is in fact going in that direction that Barack Obama thought it was. Benjamin Netanyahu may actually have a valid point to suggest that he in fact represents the kind of direction of history more than Obama did. And so I think on the one hand, I think American Jews find it harder to focus on what's happening in Israel because there's such a sense of crisis in the United States, even before Pittsburgh and certainly post-Pittsburgh. But also perhaps there's more of a sense of a kind of common struggle in the sense that the parallels are more stark than they were now. I mean, I went to Israel this summer for my niece's bat mitzvah, and I was stopped briefly at Ben Gurion Airport. It was a very trivial kind of experience compared to the experience that Palestinians and Arab and Muslims and all kinds of other people who don't have the privilege of being a kind of nice American Jewish boy kind of experience at Ben Gurion all the time. But still, in that brief period where I was talking to my interrogator, he said one thing that really, really struck me, which is he said he wanted to know if I was going to protest because I had gone on a protest in Hebron in 2016. And he said at one point, he said, if I came to America to demand that they give the land back to the Native Americans, parenthetically, of course, it's just kind of fascinating, right? From a Zionist, right, is saying essentially the Palestinians are the Native Americans, right? What exactly that does to the Zionist perspective, I think, is itself kind of quite remarkable. How often one hears that, right? In Zionism, aren't the Jews supposed to be the Native Americans? But anyway, putting that aside, he says, if I went to America to be in part of a protest to give back the land to the Native Americans, you would put me on the first plane back to Israel. And there was a part of me as this kind of, as this American wanted to say, I wanted to say to him, well, that's ridiculous. Don't you know that in the United States, we have due process and we allow people. And then I thought, look, I'm talking to this guy in the era of Trump, maybe what am I going to say to him? Maybe, in fact, I can't, maybe he's right, And it is striking. I think that what in both societies, I think there's been a realization for people who were liberals, like myself, not necessarily radicals, but liberals, a recognition that the democratic institutions and norms that we believed were there are actually much thinner than we had realized. I mean, in Brazil now, since Bolsonaro has taken place, the people say, well, Brazil's only been a democracy since 1985. But if you think about the United States and Israel, right? In Israel, Palestinian citizens lived under military law until 1966, right? You don't have a very long history. You don't have to go back very far until there wasn't even the semblance of basic things like freedom of movement inside the Green Line, right? And in the United States, if you think, the United States doesn't really become a democracy in many ways until the 1960s and 70s, because until that point, most African Americans in the United States can't vote. And that many of these vestiges remained have always been there, in the fact in Israel, for instance, that Palestinian citizens, that the Palestinian Arab parties are basically, it's not considered legitimate to bring them into Israeli governments for the purposes of getting to 61 seats in the Knesset, for instance, right? That seems to me a pretty robustly anti-democratic political tradition that's very deeply rooted in Israel. Or the fact that in the United States, large numbers of African Americans are disenfranchised through a whole number of ways, through the fact that people who get convicted for felonies can therefore not vote, or the fact that, surprise, surprise, in the states with the largest African American populations, it's often hardest to vote, and that the state puts up all kinds of myriad difficulties that make it difficult for people of color and poor people to vote. So I think we're seeing that some of the illusions that we had about how truly liberal democratic these countries were just that, were illusions. And now those things are we're being forced to confront them. And I think in both societies, the question is, can the response to that be a demand not just to go back to the status quo ante, right? Not just to go back to the Israel of the day before the nation state law or the America of the day before Donald Trump, but to really actually go deeper, to be more fundamental, and to try to uproot some of the more very basic, fundamentally anti-democratic and illiberal foundations of our two political systems that may be been put into stark relief by the nation state bill and by Donald Trump, but were always there and which made those things possible in the first place.
So, Thabet, if we look at the climate this summer leading up to the passage of the nation-state law and then the protests immediately after, Abraham Initiatives were among the leaders of those efforts, along with the New Israel Fund and many of our other grantee organizations, first taking to the streets to try to protest the passage, and also within the Knesset doing all kinds of efforts, first to try to tank it, and then to try to make it a little bit less horrible. And then there were major protests in the days after the passage, a huge protest initiated by Druze citizens of Israel, later a protest that was primarily Palestinian citizens of Israel. And actually when Mickey Gitzen, the Israeli director of New Israel Fund, called for Israeli Jews to show up in solidarity with Palestinian citizens of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu posted on Facebook saying that he was a traitor and personally calling him out and saying the New Israel Fund is trying to make Israel a state for all of its citizens, directly quoting the Declaration of Independence. One of the most beautiful things that we saw in the days after was a massive public Arabic lesson organized primarily by Abraham Initiatives to push back against the demotion of the status of Arabic in Israel. Thabet, I'd love for you to talk from your perspective about those protests and those initiatives in the days leading up and in the days and weeks following.
Yeah, well, actually, I would like to go back and just emphasize that the Arab minority, the Palestinian minorities inside Israel, is there to stay, okay? It's not going to go anywhere, just like the majority of the Jewish majority of the Israeli people.
Even if the defense minister tried to transfer Al-Fahim?
Well, we together with you will resist such policies and plans, and we're doing that. The Jewish-Arab cooperation didn't start in the eve of this enactment of this law. Actually, I'll go back a couple of years ago, and to tell you that Jewish-Arab demonstration, big one, took place in Tel Aviv following the incident in the Bedouin village of al-Hiran and the killing of the Yaqub Abu Ghayyan teacher, okay? It was massive demonstration. Now, I'm happy to tell you that so many different Jewish and Arab organization, civic society, so active right now, okay? Actually, we are part of coalition of organization that already we are preparing for the International Day of Human Rights to talk. We will take the streets, we'll do something regarding the nation-state law. So the cooperation is there, okay? And we are actually fighting back. And there are so many good things in the field that maybe you cannot feel them here. I can say we are inspired. First of all, the fact that almost half of the Knesset members, Jews and Arabs, okay, voted against the law, okay? It's a controversial issue in Israel for Jews, for Arabs, and we have to find a way to cooperate as much as possible with everybody who is opposing the law, and this is what we are trying to do, okay? Academicians in universities, signing petitions, okay? It's not a matter of the NGOs, but no doubt what we saw, okay? In 11th, especially in the 2 weeks after the enactment of the law in Tel Aviv, it's a milestone in Jewish-Arab relations. It's a platform for future cooperation between Arabs and Jews. And I'm telling you, I'm trying to analyze what's going on in terms of politics, okay? Right now, there are so many good things happening within Israeli society. Now we are talking about nation-state law. But I can tell you there is a big victory of the, I will say, the progressive forces in the mixed cities. From Upper Nazareth to Akko, to Haifa, to Tel Aviv, Yafo, even Lod and Ramli. 1/3, okay, of the members of the council of the municipality of Lod are Arabs. 6 out of 19, I believe. Okay, it's a huge number. Okay, that even the radical mayor of Lod cannot just pass over those 6 people. Okay, so there is a negotiation right now in all mixed cities between Jewish mayors and Arabs to be part of the coalition. This is something new in the local politics in Israel that can really affect the national politics, okay, towards something huge. I believe any change, we have to make change, political change in the national level. And without the 20% of the population, without the Arab politicians, Arab politics, this change cannot take place. So there is so many good things happening on the ground. We have just to push for more Arab-Jewish cooperation, okay? The Arab community is changing. It's very important to just mention that. What's going internally is changing. I can just give you one statistics. Until recently, only 10 Arab women were members of local governments, Arab local governments in Israel. Now the number went up to 26. Okay, 26, more than doubled the number. This is new for the Arab community. We are changing. We believe the civic discourse mean that Arab-Jewish cooperation is taking roots within the Israeli society. Hopefully, this will be translated to political cooperation without participation and representation of the Arab community within the national level. We are not going to progress. We believe Arab citizens should be in every realm of the Israeli society. There is a progress in the campuses. There's progress even in the private sector. I'm saying that just to give you hope. Not everything is dark in Israel. We can fight back successfully.
Shlomi, can you talk about what you feel like your responsibility is as an Israeli Jew and the role of Jewish citizens of Israel who want to affect change?
My responsibility? I don't think that I have any fault of it, but we didn't mention yet the Druze in Israel, because we talked now about the Arab Muslims, we talked about the leftists, and we didn't mention yet the Druze in Israel. And I just today interviewed one of a soldier in the IDF, a Druze guy from Sujur. And it was about he tried to organize a treatment for a unit that experienced trauma during the war in Gaza, the protective age. And I asked him, what's your name? And he said, Omri. And I said, Omri, gently, it's an Hebrew name. It's not a Druze name, it's not an Arab name. And he said, yes, my sister, her name is Yasmin, and my brother, Adam. And when they asked their parents, why did you call us the bilateral names? And the mother said, because we wanted to make you easier life. So it's not started today before the national law. And I found myself that the environment in Israel, as I said before, is not just the national law that we are gathered here to speak about. It's a process. It's a process from many points of view, many points in Israel. For example, we didn't mention yet the loyalty law in culture. So if you're not, you're not respect the Israeli symbol, you're a traitor. And I must tell you, in my documentary, Foreign Land, I tried to insert this law to my film. And I have, believe me, hundreds of rushes of Mir Regev, the minister, the culture minister. And I couldn't quote her. Nothing bad that I heard from her statements. Because when you think about it, it's very logical. Who said something against Israel, to destroy Israel, or devastate Israel, or ignore the existence of Israel, we will not found him. We will not give any budget to the theater, the Israeli theater, that perform plays that denounced Israel. But the question is how you commentate this. Commentate this law if you are not accept the occupation, you're a traitor. If you're not accept any other law of the right wing, you're a traitor. If you're not support every steps of Habait HaYehudi, when the Beit HaYehudi, the right-wing political party that tried to speak about annexation of the West Bank, you are not part of us. But when you ask me what is my responsibility, I did my best as a journalist, as a reporter. But unfortunately, and many friends criticized my decision, I raised my hand and I said, I lost the battle. I don't know if I lost the war, but we lost the battle. Because the power, the political power today in Israel, it's much more stronger than any parties, than anything civil parties in Israel. And I'm very confused. What should I do to save the direction, to bring Israel to the right path? And I must tell you that I don't know. At the conclusion, my conclusion, and I think that you will not be happy to hear it, I feel that I lost the war.
So I just want to add a little bit of background. The law that Shlomi is talking about, which is currently being proposed by Minister of Culture and Sport, Miri Regev, would prevent artists who don't pass a loyalty test from getting any government funding for their art. This follows on the heels of other decisions that she and her government have made in recent years. There was a very well publicized case a few years ago where artists and artistic companies who refused to perform in the settlements, including a performing arts center in Ariel, were denied funding from the government for their work. And this is an extremely disturbing trend to see the voices of artists being curtailed in this way. Rana, I really want to hear from you.
Just to add one sentence, because if you will not, in Israel, not like in America, because everything here is private, in Israel, if you will not found the art, there is no art in Israel anymore.
Absolutely. So, Rana, so much of your work is about harnessing the power of stories, to tell the stories of Palestinian citizens of Israel, and really looking at the transformational possibility of telling those stories. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I feel like I have to respond a little bit to what just you talk really beautifully. I feel like, it's not new. It's not a surprise what happened with this law. Before, Arabic wasn't really a language, official language. I grew up in a Jewish place. My parents speak Arabic to me when I was young, but not in an ideological choice, but I saw all my surroundings speak Hebrew, and I insisted to speak Hebrew. I didn't want to speak Arabic because I felt the environment just telling me, maybe not directly, but telling me Arabic has no place in here and no place in Israel. And Arab citizens are being discriminated for so long, and this law, I guess this is why maybe you and I are speaking with a little bit of hope, even because we feel like, as you just said, now we are forcing to confront that. We are forcing to try to think about a solution of all this problem. Before it was still happening, but it wasn't maybe in a statement. And if I think about responsibility, I feel like we are all responsible. And yesterday also we had this, it was yesterday the panel? It was also an interesting panel. And I feel it in many conversations, in film festivals, but also, in academic circles or intellectual circles in Israel and the Western world. We very much love to complain about the right-wing government, about their decisions, and I feel like it's really important to criticize, but it didn't came from anything. Those people came from our society. We kind of build this also feelings and people and thoughts. So we have to know how to communicate with this also, with those thoughts, because I feel like when we say it's all about them, then we don't take responsibility as society, as citizens, and we have to find a way, everybody in his own little circle who can influence, either if it's your family or your class or your, friends at work. We have to know how to communicate, and also like left and right inside of Israel, they don't know how to communicate. And I feel like Arab citizens, don't really feel belong to any wing. We're not lefties, we're not right, because there's a lot of fakeness inside. And I feel like also with this loyalty law, we're now forcing to really confront these issues, and it's really important. And we can approach this time as a very critical time, and we can change from the bottom. This is what I think, yeah.
I want to make sure we have time for a few questions from the room. So just in closing, Peter, I wonder if you could just say a few words on the state of democracy in Israel. And I think a lot about democracy as an American Jewish value, and that the undermining of Israeli democracy is deeply shaking American Jews, because we hold that so deeply as a value. And so, kind of zooming out the big picture, what do you see as going on in this moment?
You know, American Jews want two things from Israel, which are in tension. Most American Jews, many American Jews. One of which is for it to be a liberal democracy. The second is for it to be a Jewish state that particularly represents and protects the rights and interests of Jews. And there's a tension between those two things. And I think that it's possible, perhaps, to minimize that tension, to find ways of, if you believe that these are both values, to try to have a thinner notion of Jewishness in the state, so that Israel can become a more liberal democratic country than it has ever been, a country that's more in keeping with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. But I think as, in fact, the tension has grown greater, because, of course, of Israel, for more than 50 years, controlling millions of Palestinian citizens under its control who lack any basic rights, don't even have citizenship in the country in which they effectively live. And now that bleeding back even inside the Green Line to things like the nation-state law, where you have explicitly privileged Israel's Jewishness over its liberal democratic character. What I sense is happening in the United States is that the camp of people in the American Jewish community who are committed to this combination of Jewish and liberal democratic is diminishing, and what's growing on both sides are a group of people who are kind of, people in like the Zionist Organization for America, for instance, who are very explicitly and emphatically interested in a Jewish state with literally no concern whatsoever for whether it represents liberal democratic values, just as they're not very concerned about whether their liberal democratic values thrive in the United States. And then a group who say explicitly that if this is the choice on offer, then they will choose equality and liberal democracy over Israel's Jewishness. And I think one of the things that I see in the American Jewish community is that while that latter position of an explicit opposition to a Jewish state in the name of liberal democracy is very heretical among middle-aged and older American Jews, and I include myself in that category. Among younger American Jews, in their 20s, for instance, it's actually not considered that extreme a position. I think, in fact, that's where the trend is going, I think, among younger American Jews who are on the left. And I think perhaps in the not too distant future in the Democratic Party. It is still today. You will not find any prominent Democrat, elected Democrat, who would be willing to say that if we have to look past the two-state solution, our choice will be for one equal state, rather than one Jewish state which controls millions of people who lack citizenship. But I don't think we are far away from the day in which prominent national Democrats will, in fact, publicly say, yes, if that is the choice, I will take a state for all its citizens, even at the cost of there no longer being a Jewish state. I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 5 years we start to see national Democrats saying that.
So let's now take a few questions from the audience. I just want to distinguish between comments and questions. We would love to hear your comments upstairs in the reception, but as time is short, we would like you to keep it to questions and to phrase those questions compactly if you can. We're going to take a few at once.
Okay, my question is both to Rana and to Peter. When Bibi Netanyahu said in the last election, you have to go to the polls, you have to vote, the Arabs are coming in droves to vote, why didn't both the Arab politicians and the people on the left say, what's wrong with them voting? They're exercising their right to vote. We should encourage them. It's wrong to say they're coming out to vote. What are you afraid of? These are citizens. They have the same rights as you do. And I think it was, tell me if you think it was an opportunity that was missed, or maybe they couldn't say it.
Let's take a couple more at once.
Hi. So my question is, and this involves certain specific news stories, is Israel now not only our friend in many ways, and et cetera, but also perhaps our enemy? And three in particular. So binary options, which are a type of investment that Israeli companies sell, which are fraud, and so they're one of the companies that did is on the FBI most wanted list. Opioids, which Teva Pharmaceutical, Israeli company, one of the biggest, is now being sued by New York City as one of the providers. And then a company in Israel that does investigations supposedly made a pitch to the Trump administration to investigate the Democratic Party. And so the special prosecutor, who's investigating Trump is now investigating them to see what the story was.
Thanks. And one more.
I'll also add that although this is a very broad topic, to try to focus it as much as possible into the nation-state law issues at hand.
Thank you. I thank everyone for speaking. What disorients me is that no one contradicted anybody. Everyone is pretty much in agreement, not only amongst themselves, but with me and probably a lot of people in the audience. If it was said that the left and the right don't know how to speak to one another, why tonight did we not take the opportunity to have speakers from the right and the left who do know how to speak to one another and teach us how to do the same?
Mm-hmm. Did you want to answer about the Arabs voting in droves?
Me? You're absolutely right. I totally agree. I want to answer to your question. I do think that people reacted at that time in my circles, but also, it became such a slogan. The Arab ran to the voting places. So people did react, but as you spoke, I thought about that people actually blamed Bibi. And of course, because this is such actually harsh and mean thing to do and very politician. But I didn't hear that much people saying, this is wonderful that they're voting. This thing I didn't hear a lot. It's beautiful that they are taking their citizens and their rights and go to do it. And I think this is really maybe even the problem with the left wing in Israel, that I feel that there is very they even love to just complain or to throw bad, comments about the right wing, but to communicate or to really, I feel like we have a social hierarchy, Most of the left wing might be in a very high class, and when we have such a government, when many of them are right-wing and not very, they are not speaking the same intellectual language, and then we have, I think, another discussion and another fight between the right and left of who is more educated or who can speak academically better, and I feel like when we will know how to communicate with each other as people, no matter who is the group that you're speaking to, and also what you said, I think it's very much important. And when we are just complaining, it takes us anywhere. But I guess also for Palestinian citizens, it was really a hard thing to hear from the Prime Minister. But again, it's not as if it's a new feeling. It just it has now a face and a voice, and it's out there. But it wasn't new. I think nobody feel surprised when it happened. Yeah.
Go ahead.
In this day, when the election in 2015, I think it was a failure of the Israeli media. All of us know today that it was a fake news. The Arab didn't move to the poll station. I was in the Al-Fahim poll station, and it was empty. I just heard the voices of the activists there. They try to convince the citizens in Al-Fahim come to vote to the joint list. And Netanyahu announced these voices, released this video, I think it was at noon, 1 o'clock afternoon, before 7 or 8 hours before they closed the polls. And the Israeli media, less, 8 hours, yes. And the Israeli media, none of the TV station sent any journalist, any team, a crew, to figure out if it's right or it's wrong. And I think the Israeli media, first of all, failed in this mission, their responsibility to show the reality, the real reality about this election.
And there's a very, I mean, again, the parallels with our own election are so striking, right? In the sense that what people like Trump and Netanyahu do is that when people threaten the established hierarchies, they describe it as a violation of law or kind of an act of corruption, right? When actually all it is it's threatening hierarchy. So we see this similar discourse now in the last days of our elections about these caravans, right? So, and there's a similar response to the left. The left's response is going to be, no, the caravans aren't a problem, they're far away. What they're not saying is that there's actually nothing illegal about what these people are doing at all, right? They have absolutely every right under international law to come to America and to seek asylum, right? And we have a right to have a process and basically to see whether they have the right to gain asylum, but they're not doing anything wrong at all, right? And yet it's being described as this horrifically illegitimate thing. And you even notice, you see how these authoritarians learn from whether, you even saw what Trump said the other day. He said, I mean, does this not sound familiar? Trump said, if they throw stones, this was his response to the US, we should treat it as if they were shooting and we should shoot. Right? If these invaders coming across the border, right? It sounds, where have we heard this before? I just wanted to say something about this conversation about diversity. I am all for the idea of having thoughtful, conservative, more right-wing voices, and I actually am on panels with those people a lot. But I would just say, in defense of this panel, in defense of the Israel Film Festival, it is very, very easy in Jewish circles in New York to find panels where you have a more left-leaning Jewish speaker and a more right-wing Jewish speaker. That's actually the norm. What's extremely unusual is a panel like this, where you have two Palestinian voices. In fact, not just unusual, but most Jewish spaces in New York City, in my experience, will not host such a panel. So it's worth noting that there's some real value.
Thank you, folks. No, we're not doing this.
So I hope we can continue this conversation upstairs. We're all going to be upstairs, and I hope that you'll all join us. I want to give Thabet the last word among our panelists.
Okay, so here I am. I'm going to introduce Shlomi I invite you to be optimists just like me. Okay?
You know,
Just 1 minute. Now, this optimism came from the fact that I'm a minority. I don't have the luxury to be pessimist, okay? I don't have this luxury. I have to fight back. I have this optimism to see my people, the Arab Palestinian sitting in the state of Israel. Come to Israeli hospitals, universities, pharmacies. You will see that an Arab pharmacist or doctor will serve you today. Situation, even in the Jewish society, more Jewish people are now looking for Arabic language to study. Teachers of Arabic language study Arabic. They're really interested more and more to know the Arab citizen, to visiting Arab towns and villages. Okay, this is something in you, despite the fact downgrading the Arabic language. So, in the political level, yes, there is bipolar disorder policy. Okay, we see a lot of rhetoric, incitement, racism against the Arabs, but also there is investment in the Arab community. When I look to over 50,000 Arab students in the Israeli universities, okay, when I look to the number of women in the Israeli labor force, which doubled itself in 1 decade, the same thing with the students. It's a source of optimism. When I see all of these demonstrations that in the heart of Tel Aviv, Arabs are Jews in dozens of thousands, this is a source of hope. Thank you.
Folks, just because we're very, very short on time, but there is a lot more to say. Of course, first of all, I'll add that there was an attempt to bring other voices to this panel, and unfortunately, we live in a very polarized community, and it's not always that easy. It should be done, and we believe it should be done, and this is all about hearing other voices. I want to throw one last question before we leave, a really practical one to Ayelet, actually, to Rabbi Ayelet Cohen. Okay, now that we're all thoroughly depressed, what can the American Jewish community do?
So I want to say I'm not depressed. I have to say that hearing Thabet and hearing Rana makes me the opposite of depressed, because knowing that we are in a world where we can raise up these voices means that we are not yet at a place where these voices are being disappeared, and it means that each of us has a responsibility to do what we can to raise up those voices, to support the individuals and the organizations who are fighting against the forces that would attack the institutions of democracy, that would try to erase differences of opinion. We are, I think, in a very new moment. What we saw this summer around the passage of the nation-state bill were people who generally are not in the habit of saying anything critical of Israel. American Jews who are deeply, deeply, deeply in the center of the legacy institutions knew that this was too much. This was not okay. And there is a lot that we can do to make sure that we are raising up those voices of the organizations trying to create change. I want to quickly just tell you about a resource that we've prepared for the festival, which is a field guide, really a guide to all of the films of the festival, each of which highlights different grantee organizations of the New Israel Fund, who is doing the work that needs to get done for women's rights, for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers, for human rights, for the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel. There are people and organizations who are doing this work, and we need to know about it. We need to not fall into despair and hand-wringing, because that is not a strategy, that is not a luxury that the people who are living on the ground have. And so we each can play a role in making sure that if we're going to talk about a problem, we can also read that one sentence in the New York Times article that's always there, talking about who's fighting it back. And if you read publications like Haaretz, there's a lot more about the organizations that are fighting it back. You can educate yourself, we all can, to know who is doing that work, to raise up that work, and to support that work. There's a lot that we can do.
Thank you. This conversation will continue here all week in the films and after the films. And right now, please continue this conversation at the New Israel Fund reception in the lobby.